The business community and the right wing in America was horrified that for the 1930s, we had had a program of raising taxes on corporations and the rich in order to fund the creation, for the first time in American history, of Social Security, unemployment compensation, the first minimum wage, and a public employment project that hired 15 million people. The rich had to pay, and the mass of the Americans got the benefits.
Here, Richard Wolfe invokes the New Deal, which is basically the point where America abandoned laissez-faire in favor of interventionism and welfarism. But America had been incredibly prosperous up until this point under laissez-faire. In particular, between the Civil War and the Great Depression, this has been a time of robust growth, real wages growing very quickly. So why abandon the system that had been responsible for making America the richest country in the world? He talked about how FDR raised taxes on the rich during the Great Depression in order to finance all these public works. But why was the Great Depression so long? What happens when you're in a recession and you start raising taxes like crazy? It's going to make things worse. So it's important to note that recessions are generally quite short-lived. And the Depression of 1929 would have been as well if the US government hadn't intervened to make matters worse. The best thing you can do when you have a recession is cut taxes and spending, and otherwise leave things alone. The market's already fixing itself. But failing that, don't interfere with prices, wages, and don't intervene in the economy. The recession is actually the economy fixing itself from the malinvestment triggered by credit expansion. So if you intervene, you don't fix the economy, you fix the fixing of the economy and you prolong the problem. That's why the Great Depression was so great, because first FDR, first Hoover, and then FDR did everything they could do to intervene, fix prices, keep wages high, and impose high taxes, and all of that aggravated the situation. Now, the Great Depression was ultimately caused by bank credit expansion under the fractional reserve system during the 1920s. So the solution, if we could go back in time, would be to go even more free market, even more laissez-faire, and have free banking. Free banking means no bailouts and no state monopoly on bank notes, Federal Reserve notes. That's the state monopoly. This way, if a bank tries to employ fractional reserves or excessive fractional reserves, they would be quickly called upon to redeem their notes for specie, aka gold, and when they were unable to produce the gold, they would be exposed as bankrupt. For example, during the War of 1812, the government needed money to fight the war, so it would sell bonds for banknotes to newly established private unincorporated banks, even though these banknotes weren't fully backed by gold. The government would then use the banknotes to purchase manufactured goods from New England. However, the New England banks were much more conservative than these other banks, and they were practicing full fractional reserves. No fractional reserves, full reserves. So the New England banks would receive these banknotes in payment for manufactured goods and then call upon the issuing banks for redemption. Of course, the issuing banks can't redeem them because they're using fractional reserve banking. They've got, say, 1,000 in gold, and they've issued 3,000 in notes. Not even a hugely leveraged amount, but in a free market system, it doesn't really matter how much you leverage because you're getting called upon for redemption almost immediately. It's only with the cartelization of the banking system and the monopoly on the money supply that banks are able to have very high leverage fractional reserve banking. So the New England banks called upon the issuing banks for redemption. The issuing banks couldn't redeem. So they should have gone bankrupt. But actually what happened was the government, which was in bed with these banks and using the money from the purchase of government bonds to fund the war effort, they said that the banks were allowed to suspend specie payment. Basically, They didn't have to make good on their debts, but they could continue making loans and collecting loans um, without paying the New England banks the gold that their banknotes said they would pay them.
Failures of capitalism. And again, briefly, to go through them. But there are three. Capitalism is unstable. Capitalism is unequal. And capitalism is fundamentally undemocratic. Let me brief.
Here, Wolfe is right about 2 out of 3. Capitalism is unequal, um, but that's not a problem, and that's not really what you should be looking at when you evaluate it. What you should be looking at is how do conditions fare for the working poor, for low income individuals, um, and the answer is they do very well under capitalism, especially laissez-faire capitalism. Real incomes for average workers, unskilled workers, increased very quickly, as well as for skilled workers and businessmen, capitalists. So everybody did pretty well across the board, but in particular, for lower income workers, the working poor, people working sort of entry level jobs, they're doing better under laissez-faire capitalism than under any other economic system, including welfareism, including socialism. So capitalism is unequal, but that's irrelevant. And uh, e- equality isn't necessarily preferred anyway. If a rich man is walking down the street and a poor man robs him, then the wealth redistribution has begun more equal. But is that a just outcome? Uh, I would say no, especially because wealth doesn't just occur. It's not just a pie that we split up based on social status. Wealth is created. It comes into being through production. And in the market economy, basically everybody is paid relative to their efforts with regards to production. Workers are paid their marginal revenue value product, which is basically what their labor contributed. Capital uh, retains its share. And there's a great justice in that the more productive you are, the more you get paid. Um, Entrepreneurs make money by forecasting consumer demand. That's how profits are made. Leftists think you make profits by screwing people over by undercutting, price cut, cutting corners. But in reality, that's not true. People don't. Consumers have brand loyalty. They're gonna, if they get a good product, they're gonna buy from that company again. And that's how you make money, is by outcompeting everybody and doing a better job and making the best product at the lowest price. So uh, so it's unequal, but that's not the criteria you should judge it on. Is capitalism unstable? No, there's nothing inherently unstable about capitalism. The business cycle isn't caused by capitalism, it's caused by central banking. It's caused by the cartelization of the banking system, by credit expansion, the fractional reserve banking system, and the efforts of the central bank to lower interest rates by purchasing government bonds. So so capitalism does not need to be unstable. That's a product of government intervention in the money supply, in the economy, in a real laissez-faire free market system with free banking. You would just have steady prosperity. I mean, you might have like for example, if there's a pandemic or a war, yes, that's going to cause a slowdown, years of lack of economic growth or negative growth, but you wouldn't have this sort of cyclical every 4 to 7 years or whatever it is. That's not part of capitalism. That's part of central banking. And then is capitalism undemocratic in the sense that I mean, in a real sense, no, because people can vote with their dollars, right? I mean, democracy, you put up the decisions to quote unquote the community. Reality, the politicians and the bureaucrats are making the decisions. So, so really, if you think about um, the system of government that we have is undemocratic um, because you have just a few select people making the decision for how everybody spends their money. Whereas if everybody spends their own money, that's the most democratic system. Every dollar has a voice. Every individual gets to spend their income on whatever they want. That's the better system, certainly. To the degree that capital is undemocratic, that's a good thing. Why should my neighbors be able to dictate what I do with my property, with my life? Why should we suffer under the tyranny of the majority mob rule? Uh, you look at the mob, there's nothing stupider than a mob. And inevitably, at the ballot box, you have politicians that are going to promise people something for nothing, demagogues like Richard Wolfe here. They're going to say, oh, you just go with us, support us, vote for us, and we'll make everything perfect. We're going to have a $15 minimum wage. Like you could just dictate through government fiat and ignore the economic realities and the unemployment you create, the fact that no business actually has to hire you, so that all you're doing is eliminating with a minimum wage is eliminating entry level work and making it harder for a lot of people to be employed in the first place. So the government doesn't have any money. If they're going to give you some money, like they say, well, where's it going to come from? And they're basically saying they're going to rob Peter to pay Paul, and are you going to be Peter or are you going to be Paul? They're telling you you're going to be Paul, but you're going to end up being Peter. You're the one who's going to foot the bill. So there's no free lunch, and that's basically what Bastiat said. The state is that great fiction, where everybody is trying to live off everybody else, but in the reality, we should just be trying to live our own lives and work and for our salary and not look for government handouts.
I believe that even the deeply flawed capitalism we have now, heavily distorted by government interference on behalf of the powerful, is preferable by far to Richard's socialism in promoting freedom, prosperity, and equality. Richard bears a very heavy burden of proof because his socialism has never existed. He repudiates my mother's Soviet Union, my mother's favorite Cuba. He has indeed called these systems state capitalist. I'm glad he's learned from their mistakes, since their mistakes has in fact, of course, cost the blood of tens of millions of innocent people. He wants the economy, as he explains in his book, Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. He wants the economy reorganized around workers' self-directed enterprises in which employees own and democratically run companies and keep the broadly defined profits or surplus that normally go to the employers. I fully support what Richard calls employees becoming their own employers, so long as people freely choose that arrangement. Richard thinks such firms are a substitute for capitalism, but they're actually just another option that capitalism offers. Nothing about the system of protecting property rights of firms in a free market dictates how these firms must be structured.
So overall, very solid start from the pro-capitalist side here. Obviously, my bias showing a little bit. Um, but while there's nothing wrong with worker co-ops by all means, so long as they're voluntary, so long as they provide the startup funds or whatever by the factory. There's some very real reasons why co-ops are very uncommon in the marketplace, and that's because the interests the financial interests of the workers are very different from the financial interests of the owners, in that the workers want to get paid right now, and the owners, they're more willing to make an investment for the future. The workers want to be guaranteed to be paid, whereas the owners are willing to embrace some risk in return for some reward. So usually workers are paycheck to paycheck. They don't have much in savings. They need their money to pay their rent, to buy their food, all the other expenses. Um, Whereas businessmen, investors, often more well off, and this actually brings us back to inequality, in that um, inequality is sort of a blessing in the capitalist system, because without the obscenely rich, who's going to create a skyscraper if everybody has $50,000 and nobody's got $1 billion? A lot of the stuff that gets done, that's an integral part of who's going to build a port, you know, uh, is an integral part of the modern economy, requires significant inequality for it to occur. But I just wanted to touch on that part about why co-ops, um, though they may be glamorized by left libertarians, aren't necessarily such a great idea. Another thing is that with pension plans, and even just self-directed investment plans, in Canada we have the TFSA. In the United States, I think it's more of a Roth IRA, they call it. Um, but these tax advantaged, self-directed retirement plans, the line between worker and capitalist is getting blurred more and more every year. You don't even have to buy a full share. You can buy fractional shares in companies now. You can do it all online. You can start with $50. So it's very easy for anybody to be a member of the so-called capitalist class, simply by saving a small portion of their income or a large portion of their income and investing it in the stock market. And you have these companies like Vanguard, massive companies managing so many assets, that are doing a great job delivering low cost um, investment platforms to everyday consumers. Um, so so that's another sense in which we already have workers being owners of businesses. A lot of companies also pay stock, or offer preferential stock purchases for workers. So the Marxist class analysis of the exploitative business class, capitalist class, you know, crushing the worker under their heel, um, it's a little outdated. Marx was writing several hundred years ago. We've made some advances since then.